Hello, everyone. I'm so very glad to be back with you here at Heartland. When I took this invitation, it seems like a year ago, I had no idea we would be in this situation, just like none of us had any idea. And I regret that I can't be with you personally. I do want to say I see you guys have found the pleasures of Zoom and of breakout rooms and of all of this wonderful technology, and that we can see the pictures and the story together. And I think that it shows us making the best of difficult times. I hope that my visit here finds your community finding a way to stay close even from afar in a time where so many of us are in need. So fairness is something that we learn about early, or I think mostly we think we learn early about unfairness. This is what we learn in childhood. Fairness is about comparing who gets less and who gets more. Currently, the fairness battle raging in my household concerns just what's happening in Calvin's cartoon. My son Elliot, who is 11, tells us that his friend gets to stay up a whole hour later than he does, and he even has Call of Duty. He forgets, though, that he stays up later than many of his friends, and that many of them don't even have an Xbox. That is how unfairness goes. Where we lose out is always more evident to us than where we win out. And this isn't just about our kids. Not noticing when you are the winner is, in a nutshell, the problem of privilege. This morning, I want to spend some time sorting out some of the conflicting ideas of fairness, identifying different ways in which things can be fair or unfair. And I want to see that what may look I want us to see that what may look unfair up close may be the only fair thing when we take a longer view. And as we think about this, I want to encourage us to focus on a certain kind of fairness, a fairness that is not about us, not about cosmic good or ill fortune, but about whether our institutions and our society writ large is constructed in a way that is fair. The other thing I want us to think about is whether fairness is always the most important thing. Are there no other things that we might value as ends, say love, happiness, health, knowledge, compassion? Sometimes the best outcome may not be the fairest outcome. And this is what we try to tell Elliot about staying up late. The point here really isn't to be fair, for staying up late isn't a contest at all. It's about what makes for him a happier, healthier life in the long term. Fairness is a very old word. It comes from Old English, a word meaning beautiful or pleasing. From very early on, fair was contrasted with foul. It was originally used in the context of navigation. The first things that were called fair or foul were winds. Fairness began to be associated with justice or impartiality as early as the 13th century, and by Shakespeare's time, it acquired its connection with paleness and whiteness. That's something unfair baked deeply into our language, the equation of fairness, justice, beauty, and whiteness. Even in the sense that we are talking about today, we apply the words fair and unfair to some very different kinds of outcomes. So I'm going to give us some names for them. Let's first just admit that some things are cosmically unfair. Sometimes things happen to people that they just don't deserve. And when we say that life is not fair, we're talking about this kind of unfairness, which we also might call bad fortune or bad luck. I'll take myself as an example and complain just a bit about my childhood. Let me summarize a few of the most unfair things that happened to me. In certain ways, I got the short end of the stick in the biological lottery. I was born with some physical and cognitive problems, which my mom thought I had because I was premature. I had trouble with balance. I was the slowest kid in my class, and I could not read until 3rd grade. To this day, I curse my poor fortune of being born slow because I love to play basketball. And while I still play basketball, so many times I just have to sigh or actually foul somebody because the guy in front of me is just quicker. The other unfair thing in my childhood is I spent a lot of time without my mom. She grew up and faced lots of illness, and I sometimes was fearful for her very life. and she often spent many months of the year in and out of rehab hospitals and missed important moments. Thankfully, though, as I've grown older, I have seldom had trouble observing that overall my life has been unfair in my favor. I most certainly did not get the short end of the stick. I was blessed with wonderful and loving parents and family who were there for me to get me through those challenges in my early life. I never got that quick first step, but I got past learning disabilities and have done just fine. And those events of early life have probably helped me, giving me a confidence and resilience that are precious resources in this world. Beyond this, though, I was born white. I was born straight and male in the United States into a family with financial means. I did not perceive myself to be wealthy, but we had everything we needed and more. A nice house, I had my own room, we could go out to eat, went on vacations. I went to good schools, and when I came to college, my parents had enough money that I could go to school and graduate without debt. My parents got money from their parents to help them buy their first house. And when I bought my first house, they did the same thing for me. Right now, I do some of those things for my older kids. I have a kid who's out of work because of the pandemic, and he's in a tough spot right now. I expect some of you may be in that same boat, or some of your children. But life has also been unfair in my son's favor. He has me to back him up, and he'll never be on the street. Is this all good fortune or cosmic good luck? Not really. Some of it is the fact that my mother contracted polio or that I was born with dyslexia. But people's strengths and deficits in mental and physical abilities and temperament are sometimes matters of pure genetic or environmental luck. But not everything that I won in life's lottery comes from that. Yes, it was lucky that I was born white and well off in the richest country on earth. But the fact that white happens to be the lucky color just isn't a cosmic accident. The privilege of my whiteness was just luck for me, but the structures of white privilege are not accidents at all. They are the work of my forebears who sought to and succeeded in rigging the game in their favor. Now, while my forebears may have worked hard to acquire wealth, the fact that this wealth can be passed down through generations is not a law of nature. It is a structure that we have built and one that we could change if we thought it right to do so. But let me turn from the cosmic and historical fairness and unfairness and where we're born and the situations we end up in, to the place that I think historically was where talk of fairness first began, and that is with games and sports and gambling. Gambling is one of the oldest pastimes, and activities like gambling cannot begin without a sense of what is fair. But what exactly are we wanting when we want a fair game? Well, in a sense, it's the idea of giving everybody an equal chance to win, you might think, but that's not quite it. For most games, we know that the chances are not equal. Some people are better at games than others. And generally, people think that part of the point of games is to allow people to compete, and may the best person or team win. So what then are we looking for in a fair game? I think it's a kind of formal principle of fairness, an idea of that there are contests and that the same rules should apply to everybody. If we are running on a track, everybody should run the same distance and the fastest person should win. You put me in that fair race with you, you're probably going to beat me. I told you I was one of the slowest guys in my class. But my hunch is that most people's instincts about fairness are born out of what they learned from playing games and sports. Fair games give everybody an equal opportunity and may the best person win. We think this allows talents and hard work to show, but there's a problem with this. Talents are not evenly distributed. Isn't that unfair? Cosmic fairness and fairness in games may be the easiest concepts to understand, but the kind of fairness that I think we really need to think and care about is the fairness of our society and its institutions. To begin thinking about this kind of fairness, let's consider policies of affirmative action. This is the idea that we might give preferential treatment to a person because of their being a member of a marginalized group, say gender, race, or ethnicity. Affirmative action in college admissions has been a subject of much moral and legal debate, and since ideas of affirmative action were developed in the 1970s, but they have recently been largely outlawed as unconstitutional and unfair by rulings of the Supreme Court. Many people find the court's reasoning plausible. They sense that there's something deeply unfair about affirmative action. A student might say, why is it that I did not, a white student might say, why is it that I did not get into Harvard while this Black or Latina student did? My test scores were higher than hers. Isn't that unfair? Well, there's a couple of things to say about this. The first thing is that when people look at the fairness of a contest, they always have to pick a point where the contest starts and where it ends. In this case, the student was thinking the contest starts with the test scores and the contest ends with who gets in. When you describe the race in this way, you can see why the student thought he was being treated unfairly, because it looks like the other student got an unfair advantage. But if you change where the race starts, things look different. If you make the race a little longer, maybe the race is completely fair because maybe the white student got a head start. Maybe the head start was access to better primary and secondary education. Maybe it was access to tutors and so on. And so in some sense, the unfairness at one point may be making up for unfairness at another point. But I think there's even a larger problem in framing affirmative action in this way. It makes it seem like the whole point of college admissions is to run a race. But that's not the point. Admission officers are not judging a race, they are building a class. And they need to build a class in a way that serves best the needs and mission of the institution. Ultimately, that mission is to provide the best possible education to those people who attend, and thereby to contribute not just to those individuals who benefit from the education, but to the larger world into which they enter. And one of the things that is transparently clear to any of us who have taught in higher education is that you get a better education if you have a more diverse student body. Students learn more and better when they are around people who do not see the world quite as they do. If everybody looks the same and has had the same kinds of experiences, it will be much harder for them to understand what the world beyond them is like and to learn to act well and wisely in that world. It's not that much different than a situation if you were trying to put together an orchestra. Sometimes what your orchestra needs is an oboist. And if there aren't many oboists, it's going to be easier to get a job if you are an oboist than if you're a violinist. Maybe bad luck for the violinist, who is a great musician, but the oboist brings the sound the orchestra needs. A similar thing happens when we hire faculty at a university. I can tell you as someone who's hired a lot over the last 25 years, that at least in my field in philosophy right now, you're going to have an easier time finding a job if you're a woman. The reason is straightforward enough. Colleges have realized that students learn better when they don't just have male professors. But up until the 1980s, the vast majority of faculty were men. Additionally, for a variety of reasons, including systematic sexism, the number of women making it through PhD programs has been small. So supply and demand at this moment favors the women who have made it through to the market. They're the oboists of the philosophical orchestra. The good news is that these efforts are changing my profession, and you now see more equality between men and women in graduate schools and increasingly in improving gender balance in departments. I see a time when this problem is starting to take care of itself. But what I hope these examples make clear is both that there are no simple facts of the matter about whether a contest is fair, and that also when a contest is about serving an institutional need or some public good, fairness, even if you can figure out what it is, isn't the only thing we should care about. When we have some good or benefit, money, jobs, status, housing, healthcare, or whatever, that needs to be shared among many. This needs to be shared among many. The problem of sharing it fairly is what philosophers call a problem of distributive justice. A natural first thought is that these goods should be distributed equally. But is equal distribution of these goods always fair? A common answer is that it will not be, because equal distributions will reward unequal contributions. They will not reward things like talent and hard work. That seems unfair to many, and there's a good case that a society which does not reward such things will simply not work at all. This, for many people, is why we must tolerate some inequality. Let me make a point about this kind of inequality. First of all, if you look at our society, it is implausible on its face that the current distributions are dependent principally on differences either in hard work or talent. Secondly, notice that differences in talent are themselves not fair if they depend upon other kinds of luck, which they do. It is thus not plausible to think that our systems of distribution are just. Imperfect though our society may be, the point that perfect equality is not possible is a serious one, and it raises the question about how much unfairness or unequalness in the distribution of wealth or power or other kinds of goods we should tolerate. And this is what theories of distributive justice are about. The most influential theory of distributive justice in the philosophical world comes from John Rawls, a Harvard philosopher writing in the latter half of the 20th century. I'll tell you just the tiniest bit about it. Rawls said that we should tolerate social and economic inequalities only if two conditions were met. First, he thought that there should always be equal opportunity to achieve positions of unequal wealth or power. And second, he thought that any social or economic inequalities should only be tolerated to the extent that they were to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. The idea here is that you can tolerate differences, but only if differences are to the benefit of the least well off. I like to explain this to my students by thinking about cutting up a pie. A pie can represent wealth or access to healthcare or jobs or any other good which is not an unlimited resource. Ask yourself this question: when should we deviate from slicing the pie into equal slices? Rawls' second principle, which is called the difference principle, suggests that we should slice the pie unevenly just so long as and to the extent that the unequal distribution makes the smallest slice bigger than it otherwise would have been. That means that even the person with the smallest slice would be better off than if there had been a more equal distribution. Let me show you how this difference principle applies to evaluating the fairness of two institutions in this country. The first is taxation, and the second is elementary and secondary education. One feature of our tax system is that we tax investment income from capital gains at a lower rate than we tax income from wages. This means that those who have wealth to invest often end up being taxed at a lower rate than those without wealth. This is a significant source of inequality, and the question is, does it achieve a bigger pie? The historical argument for lowering capital gains taxes is that it stimulates investment, which stimulates economic growth, which makes for a bigger pie. This is the heart of what, since the era of Ronald Reagan, has been called trickle-down economics. The thinking of most economists nowadays is that trickle-down economics has not worked, both because it hasn't really enlarged the pie over time, over what it would have been if we had taxed income and investment more equally, and also because the pieces of the pie for the least well off have not risen as promised. If this is right, then this approach to taxation is an injustice. Another aspect of taxation is how we handle inheritance. One of the things that we allow is for people to pass wealth to their heirs. And because of the ways in which capital gains are treated at death, we allow people to avoid taxes entirely upon some kinds of wealth. What that does is to increase inequality in the next generation. And it is not at all clear how that makes the pie bigger. Now, my second example, and this is the one I want to close with as we think about, is how we fund schools in the United States. Unlike many countries in this world, we tie our funding to local municipalities and to property taxes. This means that where you live determines how much money is spent on children's education and on how good and this approach to distribution clearly cannot be justified using that difference principle. There is no plausible reason to think that this approach makes the education of the least advantaged better than if funding were more equally distributed. Zip code in the United States is destiny, and that's a kind of unfairness that we should not tolerate. So let me close here by talking about children, about our own children and the children of others. I am convinced that many of the worst things that we do as a society, we as citizens, we as voters, we as people in position of power, we do them for the sake of our children. And when I say our children, I mean our own children at the expense of other children. And when I say we, this isn't some generic we, this is me, this is you, it is all of us. It is the most natural parental instinct in the world to want to give your child every advantage. We start out from day one trying to make the race unfair in our children's favor. We do it out of love, we do it out of instinct, we do it out of loyalty, and we do it out of a tremendous fear that if we don't, our children may fall behind. And it is this fact that makes it so hard for us to fix this kind of unfairness. Right now in this pandemic, we are struggling to take care of our own children, and it is so hard when our children are struggling not to lose sight of the fact that every child needs help. And here is the place where we must take the hardest look at ourselves. We have to ask ourselves if the inequalities of this kind that we tolerate are really inequalities that make the world better for all. We need to ask ourselves if our loyalties to those we love, those most dear to us, are making us blind to our duty to all of God's children. This is not a problem of individual action, but of collective action. We can only solve it by coming together through our politics to bind ourselves so that our instincts to take care of our own children do not rob other children of what they deserve. I'll leave you today with some wise and often quoted words from Dr. Martin Luther King. Sitting in the Birmingham jail, he wrote to us, and he said this: "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." So we are weaving that garment right now. I wish you wisdom, courage, and peace in these difficult times.